Pleasant good morning all, and welcome to the officials of the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Finance and the National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago, the NIBTT. My name is Devendranath Tanku, and I'm the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee. The Public Accounts Committee, the PAC, has a mandate to consider and report to the House on A, appropriation accounts of monies expended out of sums granted by Parliament to meet the public expenditure of Trinidad and Tobago. B, such other accounts as may be referred to the committee by the House of Representatives or as are authorized or required to be considered by the committee under any other enactment. C, the report of the Auditor General on any such accounts. And D, whether policy is carried out efficiently, effectively, and economically, and whether expenditure conforms to the authority which governs it. The purpose of this meeting today is for the Public Accounts Committee to conduct an investigation and an examination of the audited financial statements of the National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial years 2014 to 2020, to assess whether expenditure conforms to the authority which governs it, to hear the challenges being faced by the key stakeholders in an attempt to determine some of the possible solutions to these challenges, and to assist the National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago in achieving the efficient delivery of services while fulfilling its mandate in an efficient, effective, and economic manner. Based on the issues identified, the following key stakeholders were invited by this committee: the Ministry of Finance and the National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago. I also wish to advise that this virtual meeting is being broadcast live on the Parliament's Channel 11, on Radio 105.5 FM, and on the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. Viewers and listeners are welcome to send their comments related to today's topics via email parl101@ttparliament.org, via Facebook /TTParliament, or via Twitter @TTParliament. Participants in today's session are also advised that your microphones should remain muted until recognized by the chair to contribute. I now welcome members of the Public Accounts Committee to introduce themselves to our viewing audience and to attendees today. Members.
Good morning, Adrian Leons, member.
Good morning, Sharice Prasad, member. Welcome to all of you.
Good morning. Roger Monroe, member. Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Member. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Minister.
Thank you. Good morning, Paula Gopi, school member, and welcome.
Good morning, Amory Brown, member. Welcome to all.
Good morning, everyone. Ayana Webster Roy, member. Welcome to everyone.
Okay, good morning, Jillian John, member.
Thank you, committee members. I will now ask members of the Ministry of Finance, representatives of the Ministry of Finance, and representatives from the National Insurance Board to introduce yourselves. May I begin with the representatives from the Ministry of Finance?
Good morning, Chairman and members. Jennifer Lachman, Acting Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Finance.
Good morning. I'm Chintamani Suku, Acting Director, Social and Economic Division.
Good morning, Suresh Dan, Senior Business Analyst, Ministry of Finance.
Good morning, Sharon Phil, Associate Professional, Ministry of Finance.
Thank you very much. May I now request that the representatives from the National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago introduce themselves?
Good morning, Chairman. My name is Niala Prasad Pulaya. I'm the Executive Director of the NIB. And with me this morning, we have our Chief Operating Officer, Corporate Services, Mr. Brendan Nelson, and our Chief Operating Officer, Business Services, Mr. Fayad Khan. I would like to take the opportunity, Chair, to apologize for the absence of our Chairman, Mr. Patrick Ferreira, who regrettably had a family emergency and is unable to be with us today. And I also want to apologize for the absence of our Deputy Chairman, who is out of the jurisdiction.
Morning, everybody.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry. All right, good morning again. Thank you all very, very much. I now invite the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Finance to make a brief opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for inviting us, the representatives from the Ministry of Finance, to this meeting to review the financial statements and operations of the National Insurance Board for the years 2014 to 2020. The role and responsibilities of the Minister of Finance as they relate to the NIB are stated in the National Insurance Act, Chapter 3201. The Ministry of Finance provides the necessary support in assisting the Minister in performing his role and responsibilities. In our role as a line ministry, we have oversight of the National Insurance Board. This morning, we welcome the opportunity to assist the committee in its deliberations today. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Madam Acting Permanent Secretary. I now invite the Executive Director of the National Insurance Board to make a brief opening statement.
Chairman and members, thank you very much for the opportunity to present and to share with you our results for the years 2014 to 2020. I just want to briefly give you an overview of some key facts. As of 2020, I know the period under review is from 2014 to 2020, but as of 2020, our customer base was just shy of 600,000 persons. Our benefit recipients are approximately 204,000 persons. In terms of benefit expenditure, Chairman, and to give to put it in context in terms of the magnitude and the giants that we are, we pay over $5.3 billion in benefits as of June 2020. Our contribution income collection stood just at $4.6 billion. Our administrative expenditure, of course, is in keeping with range at 5.36 of contribution income. And Chair, we are proud to report that our total assets as at June 2020 stood at $28.9 billion. Just to give you a context, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. The way we will proceed is that I will lead the initial inquiry. I will ask questions initially, and then I will open the floor to other members of the committee to ask questions to both Ministry of Finance and representatives from the National Insurance Board. Members, if I may, I want to initiate today's inquiry by referring to the Ministry of Finance first off. So this query is to Acting Permanent Secretary, Mrs. Lachman. Ma'am, your committee is extremely concerned about the tardiness in reporting by the Ministry of Finance to the Parliament. We have had instances previously where, based on your Ministry of Finance letter to the committee on February 12th, 2021, you provided some information as to the procedure by which the reports, so those will be the annual reports and the audited financial statements, are supposed to have been provided to the Parliament. I know that I may be putting you on the spot, but that's intentional, ma'am. Section 13 of the Act that governs the National Insurance Board, that is the National Insurance Act, makes specific provision for the National Insurance Board's report to be submitted to the minister, and therefore for the minister to submit to the Parliament. But I note that that has been very, it's not been kept to the law. So that means that somewhere along the line, we are having a breach of the law in the submission of the annual reports and the audited financial statements to the Parliament. I note in your letter, in fact, I note in the letter from the NIB that the 2019 report was submitted by the NIB on September 30th, 2019, but it was only laid in the Parliament on 25th of June, 2021. The 2020 submission, which the Executive Director just referred to as well, was submitted to Parliament on September 30th, 2020, but it was submitted to the Ministry of Finance on September 30th, 2020, but only laid in Parliament on June 25th, 2021. Again, there's a breach there. By all accounts, it appears that the National Insurance Board has, up to that point, 2019 and 2020, has met its mandate in that it kept to the timely submission of its report. But there seems to be a stumbling block somehow within the Ministry of Finance in terms of getting these reports to the Parliament on time. Madam Pierce, I don't know if you can advise me as to what the reason is for these late submissions coming from the Ministry of Finance to the Parliament's floor. Would you be able to advise why we have these late submissions, ma'am?
First of all, Chairman, we do acknowledge that there were late submissions. However, when we are in receipt of the annual report, the report has to go to the specific division that deals with analyzing the report. When the report is analyzed, it goes for approval, and then the Minister of Finance does a covering report and submits it to Parliament. Now, Chairman, we recognize that it has been late, but we have tried to rectify that in this financial year. We received the 2021 annual report and by letter dated 3rd January 2022, and within 2 weeks, we submitted it for review, and at this point, it is being processed to go to Parliament.
All right. So, ma'am, what you've just described to me is the procedure that is usually followed. So I want to treat with 2019 and 2020 first, because that's immediately before us. And then I will treat with 2021. In both 2019 and 2020, the NIB kept to its mandate. It submitted on time. The same procedure that would have been followed then, I assume, is what is being followed in 2020 for the 2021 report. But we had a delay. Now, that delay effectively means that there was a breach in the reporting as required by law, as required by Section 13 of the Act. And I have not heard any reference to that breach as to why, in fact, we had that breach. What you told me was just a procedure. This is a process that has been taking place for, 49 years. It's been 49 years that the NIB report, the annual report and the audited financial statements have been brought to Parliament. 49 years. And yet we still have a delay. Ma'am, I don't know about you. I want to pronounce that that is an unacceptable state of affairs. If you are saying, though, that that mechanism that failed in 2020 and 2021 has now been fixed so that we have the last report submitted by the NIB and is now in preparation state to be submitted to the Parliament. If you're saying that that problem that existed before has been resolved and been fixed so that we will not have late submissions, then I think the committee will be very interested in hearing that.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, not to blame the COVID-19 pandemic, but as everyone would recognize, the logistics of having persons within the Ministry of Finance building, there were restrictions, in addition to which the division that deals with the analysis and review and onward submission was severely constrained in terms of resources, staff resources. That has since been rectified and continues to be rectified.
Ma'am, I hear you. However, I know that the NIB would have been similarly constrained, but they seem to have been able to meet their mandate in 2019 and 2020 reports, regardless of the fact that they also were exposed to COVID. So I know that you gave me two explanations. So I'm picking one, which was the absence of sufficient resources, because the other one, NIB would have had the same issues with regards to the presence of COVID-19 and difficulties in working conditions, but they managed to keep to their obligation. Can you specify what sorts of resources were short during the review of the 2019 and 2020 annual reports, ma'am?
Chairman, these specifics of it I don't have right now, but I can definitely provide that in writing for you, if you allow me, please.
Yes, thank you. Now on to the 2021 financial report. The annual report that you indicated previously has been submitted by the NIB on January 2021. Is that correct, ma'am?
2022, Chairman.
Sorry, January 2022. Can you give me the date again on which that was submitted?
It was submitted by the letter dated January 3rd, 2022.
Thank you. So can I then turn to the Executive Director of the NIB? Ma'am, you commendably were able to fulfill your obligations to the Act for the 2019 and 2020 submissions. But there seems to have been a serious hiccup in keeping to the requirements of the Act for 2021 submission. Can you advise what was the reason for that hiccup? What was the hiccup and why and how it has been resolved?
Yes, Chairman, our Board of Directors expired in August, on or about August of 2021, and it was not reconstituted until sometime in the middle of November of 2021. At the time of reconstitution, meetings were held and the financials was considered by the Audit Committee in December and the Board in December and approved. And our earliest date that we could have submitted to the Ministry of Finance was on the 3rd of January. So the delay, Chair, was occasioned as a result of the expiry of our board, and we were required to await the reconstitution of our board, which came in November. Meetings were held in December.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Is it because the chairman of the NIB is also the chairman of the Audit Committee? Is that correct?
No, Chair. The chairman of the board is not the chairman of the Audit Committee, but once one member's term expires, our legal advice is that the entire board comes to an end and it must be reconstituted again. So on that occasion in August, only 3 members' terms would have expired, but the board itself had expired.
So, ma'am, can you advise, just to confirm for the record, that the terms of directors the term of the board that came to an end because they had served the life of their tenure as per their appointment correspondence, as their appointment letters. So the term ended when it should have ended, when it should have been predicted to have ended. Is that correct, ma'am?
That is correct, Chairman. The business and labor reps. So our board is comprised of government, business, and labor reps and the executive director. The business and labor reps would have expired in August of 2021, having served 2 years. And they were then reappointed in November of 2021.
If I may turn to the Ministry of Finance, can the Ministry of Finance advise why is it that we had this lapse in the appointment of directors, especially given the critical nature of the reporting requirements for the NIB? Is it that you did not receive submissions from the various organizations which are supposed to submit? If so, then advise us what measures would have been taken by the Ministry of Finance to ensure that we have a functional board of a fully established and functional board of the NIB. It seems a little bit concerning that we did not have a functioning board for a period of time, which has negatively impacted upon the board's ability to deliver on its mandate by law.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. I will pass it on to Mr. Dan.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, committee members. The Ministry of Finance had a bit of an issue in terms of sourcing the nominees for from the representatives of business and labor. We conducted an exercise whereby we requested the nominees. However, this took some time simply because of the fact that during the time, a lot of businesses, the associations, I should say, sorry, because of the COVID situation and they not been working from the offices and stuff, we did telephone calls, we did emails, which took a while for responses from the different agencies. And as a result of that, by the time we did get the nominees, well, you would appreciate that time would have passed on somewhat. And however, we did prepare up we got the nominees, we prepared up the notes and stuff, and we submitted it for cabinet approval.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dan. Just to put you on the spot further, can you advise when these nominations were submitted to cabinet for their consideration?
The exact time at this point in time, I cannot say so, but we're willing to provide it in writing for you.
Thank you. A further follow-up question. Given that the expiry would have been predicted, can you advise Mr. Dan or Acting Permanent Secretary, during what time frame did we attempt to initiate the replacement or the appointment of replacements or the continuation of these directors? Can you tell me when we started the process, given that we knew when it was going to become desperately needed?
At this point, I really cannot say for sure. So therefore, I will have to check our records and provide you with it.
Thank you. Back to the Ministry of Finance, ma'am. Given that we now have 2 breaches of the law, I'm not too sure what the mechanism is, but we have had for the annual report 2019 and annual report 2021, what is in effect a breach of the law, that is a breach of section 13 of the Act 3201. Can the Ministry of Finance advise what, if any, action is the ministry now liable to as a result of breaching of this act? Is there no penalty for breaching the act, the National Insurance Act, especially with regards to section 13 of the Act?
Chairman, I believe that there are no provisions or sanctions within the National Insurance Act, but I will have to review. But based on my previous review, I believe that there are no sanctions.
Right. I had came to the same conclusion based on my own review. But isn't it, well, let me ask it differently. Do you not think that if the Act mandates, because it says the board shall and the minister shall, if the Act mandates a specific time frame for submission of the annual reports and the annual audited financial statements, should there not be some level of accounting for why?
Yes, Chairman, and hence the reason why we would have had to review our internal processes.
Can you confirm whether or not you have made any recommendations to the minister, having liaised with the board of the NIB, for any amendments to the legislation with regards to this particular clause? Or is it that we are going to have to be forced to accept that even though it's written in the Act, it's not really going to be adhered to because there's no penalty?
Chairman, we take the provisions of the Act very seriously, and we would not set out to breach any aspects of the legislation. However, to answer your question as to whether recommendations are made to the Minister of Finance in relation to this aspect, I would say no recommendations have been made thus far.
Thank you very much, Madam Permanent Secretary. I am enthused by your reference to the Ministry of Finance deliberations and intent to abide by the National Insurance Act, that is Act Chapter 3201, because that leads me easily into the following segue. Section 3 of the Act. Section 3 of the National Insurance Board Act makes specific provisions for the appointment of a chairman. Are you familiar with the Act, ma'am?
Yes, Chairman.
Now, I know that we did not have a chairman of the NIB for a short period of time, and one was recently appointed. That appointment would have been done by the Ministry of Finance in accordance with Section 3 of the National Insurance Act, which reads in part, that is Section 3, sub 2, sub D. The board shall consist of 11 members designated directors who shall be appointed by the minister as follows. And there's A, B, C. But item D is the one I'm most interested in pursuing at this point. Item D says a person who in the opinion of the minister is independent of the government, business and labor, who shall be the chairman. Ma'am, can you advise who the chairman of the NIB is at this point in time?
Yes, Chairman, it is Mr. Patrick Ferreira.
In your view, ma'am, in fact, no, I should not be so unkind. Just to repeat that the person who is in the opinion of the minister is independent of government, business and labor, who shall be chairman. Can you advise if the current chairman served on the board of NIB in a previous capacity, and if so, what that capacity was?
Yes, Chairman, served in the capacity of director representing government.
So then, as the acting permanent secretary, who is anxious to be in full compliance with the legislation, since the chairman, who unfortunately is not with us today, since the chairman of the NIBTT served previously as a government representative, would it not be a breach of Section 3 of this Act, which says that that person should be independent of the government, business and labor? Do you not think that it's a breach?
Okay, Chairman, Section 2D says a person who, in the opinion of the minister, is independent of the government, business and labor, who shall be the chairman. Therefore, as you would recognize, Chairman, that is a policy decision that is out of the remit of the permanent secretary or any public servant.
While I accept that, ma'am, you are responsible for ensuring the full compliance with the legislation as the permanent secretary acting in the ministry. That is your role. Your role is to ensure that the law is rigidly adhered to. Can you advise whether you sought legal opinion with regards to this appointment?
Chairman, I would have to say the minister will be addressing that. In my capacity, I will not be addressing it because the Act clearly states in the opinion of the minister. I may have my opinion of what you are asking today, but it is in the opinion of the minister, and as I was saying, it's a policy decision that we are dealing with.
I turn that question over now to the executive director. In fact, no, I would want to stick with the ministry just for 1 second, just to belabor the point a little bit, that the ministry is responsible for overseeing the operations of the National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago and for ensuring that they are in full compliance with the legislation that governs it. We have already established that there have been substantial, well, not substantial, but several breaches of Section 13. And I am now extremely concerned that there's a significant breach with regards to Clause 3, which is the appointment of a chairman. I accept that it's in the opinion of the minister, but it's the role and function of the Ministry of Finance, headed by the permanent secretary, in this case yourself, to ensure that the law is followed to the rule, to ensure that there's no vagueness with regards to this specific clause. So just to make that point, that you are responsible directly for ensuring that the NIB acts in full accordance with the law, because you, as the Ministry of Finance's representative for overseeing the operations of the NIB. I accept that a question can probably best be posed to the minister. However, we now have a situation where the Ministry of Finance has, in my opinion, appointed a member to the board as chairman. He also sits as chair of other subcommittees, as chairman who may not realistically and legally be qualified to sit in the position that he's in. And that may run the risk of bringing the board of the National Insurance Board into disrepute and some level of legal query. I'm just putting that on record that I am very, very concerned about that issue. I'm sure other colleagues will raise their issues thereafter, whether or not they feel similarly. Madam Executive Director, Mrs. Niala Prasad-Pulaya, would I be putting you too much on the spot for you to give, having been there before, during, and after, and having worked within the legal confines of the Act itself, which governs in the NIBTT, whether you have an opinion or whether you have sought legal guidance? In fact, that's the question I want you to respond to. I wouldn't want to put you in such a difficult situation to answer the other one. Would you advise whether or not legal guidance has been provided, which would clear the appointment of any query, concerns, issues regarding the appointment of the chairman?
Chairman, no legal advice has been sought or provided on this matter.
Thank you. Moving forward,
Chairman,
I would like...
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just on a point of clarification, I noted an exchange that just occurred. And is it the reality that you've posed a question to officers appearing before the committee and requested and then indicated that they are not the individuals who should respond to this question? I just want to be clear on the exchange that I just witnessed.
Sure, Chairman.
Because it did...
I asked whether legal opinion... Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Chairman, it did appear to me, and now you did take the opportunity to share your personal views and perspectives, but it did appear to me, in my perspective, that some of the content of that exchange, initiated by your very good self, might be better placed in a motion before Parliament or some other opportunity to probe your concern, as opposed to being asked as a question to those who are currently before the committee. But again, this is my perspective, and I just wanted to to make clear whether you would have posed a particular question, raised a challenge, and then indicated that you did not expect a response from those currently appearing before the committee.
Thank you, Member. Just for clarification, my query specifically was with regards to whether any legal action or legal guidance has been sought with regards to this appointment. And I think both members from the Ministry of Finance and from the National Insurance Board have answered appropriately. Thank you very much. I now turn over the floor to other members of the committee who will pursue other issues. I know Member Monroe wanted to weigh in at this point. Member?
Thank you very much, Chairman. And good morning again to all attendees. Chairman, my question is directed to the team at NIBTT. And I would like to know, based on the measures that were implemented to overcome the employer compliance challenges, which were presented in a document to this committee, such as compliance policy and procedure, were reviewed auditing of employees with long outstanding pending audits, and the others that were listed. I would like to know, could you tell this committee, please, when was the review of the compliance and policy and procedure completed? 1, and 2, what were the conclusions of the review and what concrete action was taken based on those conclusions? Thank you.
Chair, this being more of an operational question, I will direct this question to Mr. Fayad Khan.
Good morning, Chairman, committee members, listening public. With respect to the compliance and the specific question as it relates to the policy development, the policy that guides the audit of employers was developed in 2015. It really focuses our compliance efforts towards a more risk-based approach to auditing. So whereas pre-2015, the NIB would have been focusing on numbers of audits conducted, this policy that was developed in 2015 really focuses the attention of our authorized officers towards industries, employers, any employers with trends of non-compliance. So it's more data-driven and it focuses the attention of the authorized officers. With respect to the other question, the other initiatives, the risk-based approach I spoke about, we've also implemented recently a telecompliance mechanism. So it was in existence previously, but with the COVID pandemic and the measures that we had to adopt very quickly, we expanded our telecompliance initiative, whereby we would contact employers and get information via electronic means as well. So that is currently active. And it also lends itself to efficiencies as well. In terms of the indirect methods of ensuring compliance, member, this is done through a robust marketing campaign. We have been engaging with the public with respect to their employees' rights and the rights and responsibilities of employers. So there's, if you were to pick up any newspaper, any media within the last 2 years, you would likely see an NIB ad reminding employers of their obligations under the National Insurance Act, right? And then, Chair, on top of all of that, we have, just to share some numbers as well, because I'm a numbers person, we have maintained, in terms of the number of employers surveyed over the years, an average of about 5,000 or so. In the last FY, we have actually crossed 6,000 employers. So we had a record year in terms of the number of audits conducted last year, despite the COVID pandemic. So just to share that information.
Thank you. Chair, may I proceed with my other question?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you. To the NIB again, I would like to ask a question based on information before me. Based on information before me about loans. And with respect to the NIB would have identified staff loans and other loans to members of staff, such as motor vehicle loans, motor vehicle insurance loans. During the financial period between 2014 to 2020, in the sum of some $1.4 million. I would like to know, when were all the loans repaid within the established timeline? 1, and 2, if no, what was the average percentage of unpaid loan for each of the financial year from 2014 to 2020?
So, Chair, just to put this into some form of context, member, under our collective agreement, we have a collective agreement for our members of staff, bargaining units A and B. And though in that agreement, the arrangements are made for loans, several loans. So they are entitled to discretionary loans, computer loans, car repair loans, educational facility loans, etc. And there's a policy that guides in terms of the eligibility criteria, the return, the payback time, etc., and the process that guides. I would want to just ask Mr. Brendan Nelson, who is our head of finance, to confirm that question in terms of the repayment.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, other members and the listening public. Our arrangement is that the loans are also insured to an extent, so motor vehicle loans are also insured. So if there's an issue in terms of the death of the staff member, the insurance company does reimburse us for that. In other instances, there's also coverage as well in terms of protecting the organization from default. And I can say to you that over that period, we have not had any defaults. Employees have salary reductions that are used to repay the loans, so that there's no issue with regards to collection of the loans over the period.
Thank you very much.
Other members?
Chairman, can I go ahead?
Yes, member. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, again. This question, my questions are directed to the NIB, and it concerns the receivables for contributions that are outstanding. Based on the information we have, $73.34 million of loans were sent to, were forwarded to collectors. Could you give a status of the initiatives to collect these monies, and what measures have been put in place to settle debts of this nature?
So, member, so there are employers that who we recognize are errant employers and delinquent employers. And from time to time, we would find that there are persons who are indebted to the NIB, whether it is through no fault of their own or through some form of deliberate concealment of monies coming into the NIB. In terms of our process, we have a legal department, and that legal department, along with our compliance department, is charged with the responsibility for debt recovery. So what triggers it is an audit. Employers are audited, and as Mr. Khan would have said, for the last financial year, we would have audited approximately 6,000 employers, and by an audit, a debt is calculated. Once the debt is calculated, we would then first try simple measures, more conciliatory in nature, in terms of a demand letter, meeting with the person, trying to have some sort of form of arrangement going in terms of a promissory note or simpler arrangements. And when that fails, the matter is escalated to our legal department, and our legal department will then take conduct of the matter in terms of debt recovery. Mr. Nelson can perhaps provide any further information. in terms of the measures that have been adopted. As I said, conciliatory in nature first, demand letters second, then of course we move to litigation. Even at the litigation stage, we also have an opportunity for customers to come in and settle with us and have any form of prepayment and installment payments before we actually move to judgment and recovery on the judgment. Is there anything you want to add, Mr. Nelson?
No, Edie, I think you covered it well. Additionally, I would just like to say to the member that the receivable is really for contribution collections, where errant employers were unable to pay their contributions for some reasons, or as the Edie would have said before, they did it, because they didn't really want to pay. But other than that, as Edie said, there's a very robust monitoring and collection system that goes along for this.
Would you be able to tell me what percentage of the debts have been collected?
Remember, I don't have that information before me, but I will be happy to provide that to you in writing.
Okay. And just on a general note, in terms of the fund, you indicated that the benefit expenditure is 5.3 billion, but the collections are 4.63 billion at the beginning of the session. So there is a deficit that is ensuing, and it's growing. Can you give the committee some indication of what measures are being put in place? Because you also have a declining population of contributors, given the age profile of the Trinidad and Tobago population, in terms of what are you going to do to, or what is being done to bridge the gap of the deficit?
Thank you, member. So every 3 years, actuarial reviews are conducted at the NIB, and that really is used to determine the level of expenditure versus benefit payments. And in the 9th and 10th actuarial review, it was projected back then that for the period 2013, that benefit contribution income would no longer be sufficient to support benefit payments. So what you have happening from 2013 is that our benefit expenditure, of course, has been growing, and that is really because of the aging population. And of course, people are living longer, healthier lifestyles. So you find that our benefit expenditure for the period, let's just say over the period 2017 to 2020, that has grown from 4.7 billion to 5.3 billion. When you compare that to our contribution income, which has been 4.6 billion, coming and barely basically 4.6, 4.7, and landing again at 4.6. So in terms of our last financial year, we would have collected in contribution income 4.6 billion. We paid out in benefit expenditure 5.3 billion. And over the period 2013 to 2019, we would have been using, of course, our realized investment income to support the benefit payments, right? However, over the last 2 years, and I know that this period is not before the committee, so I will speak very cautiously about it because I know the period is up to 2020, but even as of 2020, our contribution income and investment income combined was insufficient to support benefit expenditure and administrative expenditure. And as a result, we have had to use not only investment income, but we have had to use some of our cash and cash equivalents to support the deficit. And remember, it is projected, of course, to continue into the future. What the NIB has proposed via the 10th actuarial review, and even in the actuarial reviews prior to that, is that the fund is sustainable, but reform is urgently required. And we have laid out the steps in the actuarial review for reform. We have recommended, and the actuarial review, the actuaries have recommended, 1, a gradual increase in the retirement age from age 60 to age 65 over a period of time. 2, The adjustment of the contribution rate, which right now stands at 13.2%. The recommendation was that it moved gradually from 13.2 to 14.4, 15.6, and then at 16% over time, of course, remember. And the third thing was, of course, to freeze the minimum pension, which right now stands at $3,000, to freeze the minimum pension until it becomes relevant. So in furtherance of those recommendations, we have been meeting with the Ministry of Finance. We have been positively engaging with them in terms of sharing what the recommendations are. And we have also gone out, Minister, to lobby with our key stakeholders. We have met with the government and business and labor stakeholders. And I will hand over to Mr. Fayad Khan for him to just share a little bit of the data in terms of those engagements that we would have had to advance the actuarial review recommendations. Fayad?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Executive Director. Thank you, member, for the question. I think that question really is the crux of the trends that we are seeing in the contribution income versus the benefit expenditure over time. So the aging population, which you referred to, really is a reality faced by countries around the world. It's not unique to Trinidad. And we do have an aging population here. The last actual review indicates that as of now, you have 3.2 contributors supporting each pensioner. That number is projected to decline to 1-to-1 over the next 50 years. So one contributor supporting one pensioner. And that is, of course, in the absence of the reform, which our executive director referred to, that is urgently needed, right? One of which being the change in the retirement age. By changing the retirement age, two things happen. One, you have persons contributing for longer. So you will see an uptick in the contribution income. And two, benefits will be paid for a shorter period of time. So you would see that number over time declining. So that's why, as an actuary, it's a recommendation that we put forward time and time again as the most impactful step in ensuring the sustainability of the system. In terms of the specifics with the engagements, we have, after each actual review, so both the 9th, the 10th, the two most recent ones, we have met with the stakeholder groups of government, business, and labor. In excess of 80% of all invitees showed up to these sessions, so it was a good turnout. I think also the public is more aware now of the issues facing sustainability and what is required to ensure that this important system remains robust and strong into the future. Member, I think you're muted, member.
My apologies. The follow-up question is, where are you in terms of the negotiation cycle? Because I know you've had lots of discussions, etc. But while this is happening, the deficit is growing, and you're eating into your investments, and that's not sustainable in the long term. In terms of implementation of the recommendations and the changes that you're advocating, could you give an indication of where you are in that cycle?
So what I could share, member, is that subsequent to the 9th actual review, there was a subsequent rate increase. So the National Insurance Board, through changes in legislation, was able to get the contribution rate moving from 12% to 13.2%. I believe it would have been back in 2015, thereabouts. That change did buffer the liquidity constraints of the system. So these changes are happening, but they're happening gradually. And we are cognizant of the fact that the economy is facing its other challenges, the macroeconomy, and care must be taken, and a gradual consultative approach must be taken in implementing any reform measures. So we are in terms of where we are in the cycle, we have consulted with the key stakeholder groups, and we continue to conduct actual reviews over time to provide more current information and projections to all the public as well as the policymakers.
Member, if I may, just to support what Fiat is saying, because I think I may have interpreted your question in terms of where we are at. As Fiat would have said, all the recommendations from the 9th and 10th actuarial review, we have carefully analyzed and have engaged on stakeholder engagements and seminars, etc., with the key stakeholders. And we are meeting with the Ministry of Finance. We have been providing them with several scenarios and options for their consideration. And I am aware that it is receiving positive consideration, member. I just felt that we should share that.
Would the Ministry of Finance be able to give the committee a synopsis of where they are in their review?
Thank you, member. At this point, what is engaging our attention is moving the retirement age from 60 to 65. And as Fiat indicated, the approach must be gradual and consultative. So we are looking into that. We are also looking at the incorporation of the self-employed into the national insurance system, which would have been another recommendation, which is engaging the Ministry of Finance as well. So we are currently engaging in, as the ED said, the different scenarios, the current economic situation, the situation with contributors, with employees, and looking to determine what kind of solution that would be palatable. That can be.
So you don't have a time frame or date for implementation, because really, I mean, it's all well and good to have stakeholder meetings and whatever, but what is the timeline to implement the various changes?
At this point, we don't have a specific timeline because analyses are being done. The minister would have, had some analyses, would have reviewed some and asked questions. So I cannot say exactly if it's 2 months or 3 months or 6 months at this point.
Okay, thank you. Chairman, thank you.
You're most welcome. Any other questions from any of my other colleagues on the committee?
Yes, Chairman. Jolene John here.
Recognize Ms. John.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I want to just reiterate something you said earlier, where you started, and I want to just ask the Madam Executive Director, with respect to the management of the NIB. I assume you'll be guided by Act Number 35 of 1971. Your tender rules, documents like a delegation of financial authority, policies approved by the board, etc. Am I correct? These are what will guide you to ensure you're not ultra-virus.
Yes, member, correct, yes.
Thank you. Therefore, I want to just go back to where the chairman started, and really I wasn't briefed on it, so it's something I have to just go back to. When he asked, and he admitted that you were the wrong person, if indeed he had posed that question to you, to ask, in terms of the appointment of your chairman. Now, if it is that this appointment is ultra-virus the law, does the decisions of the board, because in looking at your act, I mean, I've been looking through your act, what runs through your act is the duty of the board. And I have never really
Chairman,
so all-encompassing. Sorry, Dr. Brown, just allow me. You can speak after.
With all respect, sure, I shall.
Thank you very much. And what I'm saying is, because this is very important, these are executives. The decisions, I mean, the organization is bounded by the decision of the board. I'm not here to argue whether the appointment was right or wrong. I'm simply saying that the decision, any decision of the board is led by the chairman who leads the board. The organization is bounded by that. And I think it is something that one will have to pay attention to, because the NIB is not above the law, and any of these decisions of the board, because when you look at it, the seal of the board shall be kept in the custody of the executive director or the secretary, as the board may determine, and may be affixed to instruments pursuant to the standing order or to a resolution of the board, and in the presence of the chairman. This is at the very beginning. You have all documents other than those required by law to be under seal made by, and all decisions of the board may be signified under the hand of the chairman. So throughout, you have all of these documents. So I'm just raising a question here as to the relationship of the chairman to the board, to the decisions, because this is a company where you have a
Chairman,
large amount of money.
On a point of order, please, and I really...
What is your point of order, Honorable Minister?
I'm referring to the chairman member, and as you know, I have great respect for you and your views, but it ties in to a point that was attempted by the chairman earlier, and it is my position that the current thread of inquiry is completely outside of the mandate of this committee. And therefore, I'm not contesting the veracity of whatever political statements might be made, but it is my view as a member of this committee that this particular point of inquiry is completely outside of the mandate of the committee on which I am a member. So I honestly did not want to interrupt you, member, because you were taking, as you have acknowledged, your note or your signal from an intervention made by the chairman earlier. And that is why I had intervened very delicately when the chairman was inquiring, because it is my observation that our mandate is to examine the audited financial statements. And this goes beyond that. So this is me, as I had suggested, this might be in the realm of a motion before Parliament, a question, other lines of inquiry as public officials, but certainly outside of the mandate of this committee. So that is my view, and I do not believe it is fair to the officers that have presented themselves before us to continue this ultra-virus exploration of matters that are clearly heavily resting on the shoulders of chairman and other honorable members of the committee. So that is my respectful view, and I would wish to discourage any further exploration of points that fall outside of the mandate of this committee.
Members, if I may, I think this matter has received the attention already that we wanted to place on it in the context in which we were pursuing, and I want to pursue other matters if it's in keeping with the committee's request. I know Mrs. Webster Roy and Mr. Leons had their hands raised, so I would turn over to both Mrs. Webster Roy and Mr. Leons in sequence, and then return to Ms. John for some additional questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to NIB. Since 2020, your company has utilized the Ethics Point software to facilitate anonymous reporting. Please detail the procurement procedure that was followed in order to choose the specific software and the associated service provider. That's my first question.
Member, just give me 1 second. I'm not sure if the other two deputies have this information available to them. So just give me 1 second. Perhaps Fiado Brendan can support, but
while you're looking for that information, you want me to ask the other two questions?
Yes, please, Member. Thank you.
Right. According to the information presented, the NIBTT would have saved US $1,042.10 on the annual subscription fee for the software in 2021. I want to know what made this possible when the subscription was renewed, And my other question, between November 2020 and October 2021, 13 reports were submitted using the ethics point reporting system. How many of these reports have been investigated and resolved? So my first question is the procurement process. The second question is what would have accounted for the savings in the subscription? And my third question, in terms of the reports received, how many were investigated and resolved? Thank you.
Member, if you may, allow me to respond to that in writing. I don't have the information readily available to me. I know that the system that we use is Ethics Point. I am aware that there would have been savings, which I trust would have been as a result of negotiations with the vendor, the supplier. And with respect to the 13 reports, those reports are investigated and reported directly to the Audit, Risk and Compliance Committee. And as the Executive Director, I'm not privy to those, but I will be happy to get the information and to provide it to you, please.
Okay, thank you. I'll accept it in writing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Mr. Lyons.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to pose a question to NIB. What is the current limit for foreign investment? And have you considered increasing foreign investment to offset the shortage in benefit income?
So before I hand over to Mr. Khan, in accordance with the National Insurance Act, there's a 70-30 allocation. So we are required by law to invest 70% locally, and we have an opportunity to invest up to 30% internationally. From recollection, I think we are just about 20% being invested internationally at this time. So I will ask Fia to just confirm if those numbers are correct. 70-30, and our international allocation just about 20%.
That is correct, Executive Director. We currently hold close to 22% in foreign equity. In terms of the plans and whether it would offset the gap, the answer to that is simply no. The foreign equity is but one asset class that we invest in, and the investment income in isolation would never be sufficient to maintain or maintain that gap by itself, right? So changes or increasing the yield on the portfolio is simply not the solution to the sustainability concerns. And in fact, the actual reviews, the 9th and 10th, which are public documents available on our website, they both highlight the fact that that improving the yields wouldn't solve the sustainability issues. But with respect to your pointed question in terms of increasing the foreign allocation, member, that is not something that we are targeting actively right now. We do reinvest our US dividends and maturities and so on that come in. So that cash that comes in is in fact reinvested. And they have been generating handsome returns.
Thank you very much. I know you have a large portfolio of investment types. You all have done some real estate. I think it was in Arima. What are your best performing investment portfolio items, and are you planning to expand on any of those?
So member, with respect to real estate really accounts for just about 1% of the entire portfolio. So it really makes small impact on the total returns. It's negligible. We do hold 57% in equity, about 28% in bonds and fixed instruments, and just about 10 to 12% in cash and cash equivalents, right? Which we do hold to meet the ongoing liquidity needs of the organization to pay benefits and operationally, right? just to add that this portfolio mix and the associated returns are all in keeping with the organization's investment policy statement. So in terms of the governance of our investments, we do comply with the National Insurance Act and the limits therein. But on top of that, we do have significant controls and strong governance within the organization to ensure that we maximize our returns for the acceptable levels of risk. So we have an investment policy statement within the organization that's really developed by management and in consultation with the investment committee and the board of directors. They would set the policy which dictates the limits and the target yields by asset class. In terms of your question with respect to the best performing asset classes within the recent financial years, the last 2 financial years, our local and international equities have been performing exceedingly well.
Okay, and just last question. Based on what you said in terms of the policies guiding your investment portfolio, how often are these policies reviewed, and are there any recommendations for modification of any of them?
These policies are reviewed between every 3 to 5 years or sooner, depending on changing economic circumstances. We would have just within the last year reviewed the investment policy statement. So our current statement takes into account the current economic realities as well as current liquidity needs of the organization. So it's actively monitored and reviewed, actually.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Any other colleagues have questions?
Chairman.
Yes, Member School.
Yeah, thank you. I'm staying on the same course of discussions on investments and, of course, staying within our remit, which is requiring into the accounts in the financial years 2014-2020. You were talking about investments. You mentioned most recently that the local investments were doing exceedingly well. Can you give us a sense of the rate of return on your local as against your foreign investments? What I'm leading to is whether or not we have to look towards a shift. Which portfolios are performing better?
Right. So, remember, with respect to the local equities, we have seen returns of just on average about 10% over the last 3 years. That is the period FY 2019 to financial year 2021. 13%, 6.7%, and 12% roughly over the 3-year period. In terms of the international equities, we have seen returns highly volatile. But on average, I can tell you the numbers, 7% in FY 2019, just about flat in 2020, and close to 40% in 2021 when the international markets really skyrocketed. So they have been performing well. But with respect to actively redeploying or shifting around those asset classes, it's not something that we do, simply because, one, the volatility, and two, the shift between local to international equity. You have the foreign exchange issues. You have the impact on the financial markets locally, were we to engage in actively selling and buying equities, right? So just as a reminder, the NIB currently holds 57% of our portfolio in equities, and this accounts for a large portion of the local stock market. We hold investments in almost every company, and were we to actively start selling and buying and trading in these securities, you will induce a lot of volatility in the local markets, which we do not want.
Thank you. So that puts some light, but you talked about the volatility in the foreign with the foreign funds in particular. And my question is, you would be in contractual arrangements with these fund managers, your foreign fund managers. What is your review policy? I mean, are you tied into, let's say, a 3-year and 5-year contracts, or based on the activity, are you allowed to go in and change your fund managers?
We are allowed, member. So the terms of these fund managers vary between 3 to 5 years, and they each have target strategies and target performance indicators that they need to meet with based on the strategies. This is something else that we actively monitor and report to our IC committee and board with respect to performance. And we are allowed to terminate due to non-performance. And it has been done in the distant past. I mean, these things happen.
Good, and that's good to know. But it leads me into this whole question of risk management in view of your huge financial responsibility. And of course, we all know that risk is inseparable from return. So in looking at your reports, I note the a risk maturity matrix, so 2017-18 rating, with a rating of fair and poor. Of course, this is, as I said, quite a little bit historic, 2017-2018. Where are we now in terms of your risk management rating? And where are you in terms of your framework and your policy?
So remember, in terms of the maturity level, I believe it would have been one of our submissions to the committee where we were asked to rate, and I believe we rated it as good. So that would be for which year? Sorry to
that
would have been as at 2020, the last year in the period under review. So we would have put a number of things in place since 2017. We have a risk management framework in place that's developed by our board and audit committee. That framework actually includes, it's in keeping with the COSO framework and the ISO standards with respect to risk management. We do have an executive manager risk in place now, as well as just the inculcation of the risk culture throughout the organization, which is one of the key components in the framework. So we take risk into account from the inception of any initiative, any project, any investment. We take risk into account during the process, and then we do a review at the end. So this is all in keeping with our framework.
But I'm pleased to know that since 2017 that you have put in place a proper framework. So I'm assuming that there's ongoing risk assessment and there's risk management training and there's tracking of risk management and so on. That's the kind of assurances that we would want to give the public today.
Yes, that is absolutely correct, member. We do have ongoing training, ongoing reporting, ongoing risk assessments. And these reports are submitted to our audit, risk and compliance committee and the board of directors.
Right.
I was just going to add something. In that actually, it was not 2017. Our framework was first established in 2015. So our enterprise risk management framework was established in 2015. And of course, there are all the supporting policies that guide that in terms of oversight, management, a separate department reporting directly up to the Audit, Risk and Compliance Committee. And the roles and responsibilities of all the members from the board of directors all the way down to each member of staff is clearly defined in terms of how we report risk and how urgently we treat with risk at the NIB.
Thank you for your intervention, and that's pleasing to know. But I had been referring to the 2017, so there's significant progress, and this is, as I said, is in the interest of the public, and I'm pleased to know this. So I'm going to leave my question there to allow my other colleagues to join us. And if they're not, I do. I'm a member, Chairman. Let me just say that if you intervene on this matter at some point, I just want to come in on digital transformation.
Sure. If I may just ask just to follow up a question that was just on the issue of the corporate risk register. Sorry, the one that we have in front of us is dated June 30th, 2017, in which there were 15 items listed as red indicating severity. Am I to understand that we have a current corporate risk register with substantially less issues raised as extremely severe in terms of risk, in terms of risk severity? We have 15 listed in 2017. Extremely, they were highlighted, they were so bad they were highlighted as red. Is it that our procedures and protocols and structures that have been put in place have now treated with most of these, so we have less such critical issues affecting the operations of the NIB?
So, Chairman, correct. In terms of the risk register, we have on any given quarter just about 10 key risks, of which there are several, 3 or so are high, and those high risks are usually reputational risks that the NIB would face from time to time, the fraud risk, and of course, political risk. But actually what has now made the number one risk in terms of the risk register would have been the sustainability of the fund and the need for urgent reform. So most of the matters, Chair, that you would have seen on the earlier risk register would have by now been closed. And we are now monitoring sustainability of the fund, reputational risk, fraud risk, and other risks. But those are the ones that have been deemed high risk.
You mentioned political risk, and I know it's defined in several sections, one of which I am assuming is the delay or inaction in implementing the actual review recommendations. But are there other types? So, for example, in a correspondence dated April 6, 2021, which I know is a bit dated now given current circumstances, but political risk was identified as related to structural changes over general promises, political influence in management or investment decision-making, etc. And it was identified then as a new risk. Would that still hold today?
Yes, Chairman. Political risk remains on our risk register, and it really falls in terms of lack of reform, because we have been lobbying for reform. So in terms of those structural parametric changes that are required, that is a policy decision. So it will remain as a risk on our register.
Thank you. I know Dr. Brown had his hand up. Dr. Brown?
Thank you very much for recognizing me, Chairman. So I just have a couple general questions that I would like to pose to those appearing before the committee today. Now, I took a look at the latest financial statements, and they all include a section on compliance and recovery. And my question is around this issue. Of course, there's a view that we live and work in a society in which there's a significant degree of institutionalized corruption. And we have members of society testing all of our systems continuously. Are you able to measure and quantify the attempts that may have been made in the past to defraud the National Insurance Board? I'm seeking some measure or incidence rate of those attempts to defraud the system. And can you outline additional members that may have been taken to help the NIB to effectively treat with such attempts to defraud the system? And then I have a supplemental question, which is related. What is the degree of employer non-compliance with NIS payments for their employees, both in the public and private sector? And how widespread is this problem currently of non-compliance? And then my final question for inquiry, and I'm sorry I have to go back to a matter raised by a member earlier, and that is seeking some further illumination on this practice of the NIB issuing special loans to its own staff. I would like a little more illumination in terms of the policy guidelines behind consideration of such loan requests and decisions. Is there a risk of this being abused? Specifically, what is a salary loan? I saw salary loans listed. What exactly is a salary loan that is being and has been offered to staff members of the NIB. So those are my questions, and I would appreciate any responses from the officers appearing before the committee. Thank you.
So, member, just for ease of reference, I will take the last question first, which is in terms of the loans. And before I ask Mr. Nelson, who is in charge of our HR division, to speak to that, all the benefits that we currently provide to our bargaining unit staff are enshrined in our collective agreements. So those would have been negotiated benefits between the union and the NIB. And yes, they are in receipt of several loans, as we said, discretionary loans, salary loans, etc. A salary loan is basically a loan to a staff member based on an identified criteria to cover certain emergency expenses. And there is a policy that treats with that member in terms of the criteria and who can and cannot qualify. Mr. Nelson, I know you have a little bit more information on the loans that you can share.
Right. So as the executive director would have said, member, these loans are really based in the collective agreement for bargaining unit staff. And it treats with, for example, if you hire an employee that requires that employee to be on the road or to be a traveling officer, that employee can apply for a loan. And that loan is actually, the approval for that loan would have actually come to the ministry in terms of the level of the loans that we can give to the employee in terms for salary, for a vehicle loan. And as the executive director explained, the salary loan is really based, it's a loan for 12 months and allows the employee to cover certain kinds of expenses that the employee may have over the period of time. And as I previously said, these loans are monitored monthly. There are salary deductions that are taken from the person's salary in order to cover these loans. And in other instances, the loan is also insured based due to the nature of the facility.
Okay.
So in terms of the risk,
what's the difference between a salary loan and a discretionary loan?
Yeah, so I was going to say in terms of the risk attached to these loans, the risk is very low because there are steps the organization can take as well to recover funds if there's an issue. With regards to your current question, a discretionary loan is really a loan that allows the executive director and the HR department to look at particular criteria that this loan covers and allows for us to approve that loan to assist the employee. So, for example, an employee may have a child that has to go away to do an exam, or a child is going away to do an exam and is looking for help for that. That can fall within this category of that facility discretionary loan. You may have an instance where an employee has a tragedy or has something happens, maybe there's a flood, their roof gets blown up, something like that. That is also a discretionary. That could also fall under the other discretionary loan in terms of the criteria that we use. But again, all of these loans are part of the collective agreement, and that has been negotiated with the union. And we are firming up in terms of putting in place, actively upgrading the policies that manage these facilities to make sure that we tighten where there's need for tightening to make sure it's the policy that governs it is very robust.
Thank you very much. And on that note, I would request that you share with the committee some additional detail, maybe in writing, in terms of what currently obtains. I appreciate your indication that there is some strengthening, the processes are to be made more robust. But in terms of what currently obtains and what HR and the relevant officers would refer to in considering applications from staff currently, I would appreciate some written detail on that framework.
Sure.
Thank you.
Member Sipasad, I know you had your hand up.
Madam Executive Director may have wished to respond to the initial question. She had taken the last one first, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. Madam Executive Director.
Yes, member, and I'm going off memory in terms of if I hope I can remember correctly the question, but I know it was in relation to compliance and recovery efforts, etc. So just to share with the committee that in terms of the measures that we have implemented for collections, and of course I'm going to call on Mr. Khan to support with a little bit more detail, but there are policies that guide the auditing of employers, for example. Our policy is now more of a risk-based policy where employers are now audited based on their level of compliance and the actual debt that is involved. So once a debt is established via an audit, we of course will now look into how we can recover that. Some of the other measures, of course, would include things like telecompliance, where we reach out to the persons to have them settle the debt. As we would have mentioned earlier, we are on a periodic blitz exercise in terms of our publicity and ensuring that persons not only comply with the law, but they are aware of the obligations under the law and what they are required to do. Coupled with that, from a human and physical point of view, we have relooked our manpower plan in terms of debt recovery. So we now have a debt recovery plan, which was approved by our board last year, which details the telecompliance, the blitz, the recovery process, and the escalations for that. We also have a major debtors collection section in our recoveries department, which is part of our compliance structure. That focuses on certain employers. So of course, we know that a big part of our employers, of course, is the government. So we have been working closely with the government and all the arms of the government to ensure that if any debts have arisen, that is reduced over time. And we also have a department that deals with the private sector in terms of working with those private and other institutions to ensure that those debts, once established, that arrangements are made to liquidate. Faya, do you want to share in terms of additional measures?
So, Madam Executive Director, in terms of the measures, I think you summarized it nicely. The policy, the approach to how we go about doing auditing, the campaign, the public awareness initiatives, which I spoke to earlier, as well as the different channels of ensuring compliance, the telecompliance mechanisms. These measures have been put in place. And just to share some numbers from the recent coming in from employers in arrears stood at 319 million versus income coming in 2020 of 547 million from employers in arrears. So it really emphasizes the value or the dollar value of the impact of our compliance initiatives. But I just want to address one point raised by the member as well with respect to fraud. Just to say that in our assessment of compliance or non-compliance, yes, we would go out and audit and conduct an audit and determine that an employer is in arrears of X dollars, let's say. But that does not necessarily imply fraud. So we do go out there to ensure compliance, but that non-compliance does not imply fraud. That's important to note. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Just for the record and for clarity based on a comment made by the Executive Director prior, can you advise, ma'am, if there are any government bodies or government agencies currently owing the NIB, and if so, how much and for how long?
Chairman, the government is an employer under the system, and we have many employers that are indebted to the NIB. So the government is one such employer that at least our records reflect is indebted to the NIB. But I would want an opportunity to provide that information to you in writing, since I don't have the data in terms of the actual amounts and the actual arms of indebtedness.
Thank you. So I look forward to receiving that. I'm assuming that this will be based on the entity itself and the value outstanding and for each of the years under review up to 2021.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. I know that Member Sipasad had indicated an intention to ask some more questions. Member?
Yeah, Well, Chairman, I think you just asked one of the questions, which was I wanted a profile of the debtors. And I assume that Mrs. Prasad Pillai, when she sends the information, it will give us a profile of public versus private sector, etc. I could just wanted to follow up on Mrs. Gopi Schoon's inquiry into your investment portfolio and ask you, why is it that you are not increasing your exposure in foreign investments to the limit of 30%? Because really what you're doing, you have a heavily weighted portfolio in Trinidad and Tobago, and that says something about your risk profile. And it also limits your diversity and liquidity as well. Could you give an indication as to why you wouldn't increase your overseas investments?
Fayad, I will ask for you to address this one.
So remember, in terms of the investments, we currently stand at in excess of 22% of our holdings in overseas investments, vis-a-vis a 30% limit. Mm-hmm. What we anticipate happening over the medium term is that as the portfolio continues to support benefit payouts and our cash and our mutual funds and other lines start to decrease, the percentage holdings in foreign equities would naturally increase due to the shrinking of the fund. So as you move along, you will see that percentage in foreign equities increasing simply due to the draws from the fund to support the operational needs of the organization. And the focus of the organization right now is really to maximize yields in the medium term to meet these benefit payouts. And that is in keeping with our investment policy statement and strategy.
But I would assume that given the negotiations that are currently being undertaken to reform or revise the pension age limit and the contributions, etc., that at some point the contributions are going to increase based on the measures being worked on right now. So I would expect that the fund would grow as opposed to being reduced. So it doesn't really answer the question as to why you wouldn't have the 30-70 structure.
Yeah. So remember, our investment decisions would be based on what is currently in force. Matters of policy and the impact on the contributions and benefits. We wouldn't want to make assumptions of that nature and run into some position where we have liquidity problems. We do not want that. Our mandate as an organization is to pay benefits to vulnerable persons. And yes, maximizing investment returns would be at the forefront of our considerations, but we certainly want to ensure that we have adequate liquidity to meet our obligations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Member Schoon.
Thank you very much, John Chair. I'm on the issue of technology and digitalization. And in your report on operations for the year end in 2017, it stated that an ICT initiative would be conducted over 3 years, beginning in November 2016. Fast forwarding, and it spoke about this design and procurement and implementation of an end-to-end ICT enterprise-wide solution for the entire organization. But again, fast forward into February 15th, this initiative was at the procurement stage. And then in a written submission dated January 7th, NIB indicated that the procurement would be finalized during the current year, 2022. Now, this is not a good reflection on advancement of technology and digitalization and so on. And my direct question to you is, where are you with the digital transformation agenda? Are your records digitized? Are your processes digitized? What is your plan of action with regard to transformation? digital transformation? Thank you.
So remember, with respect, and I'm happy that we're there, because with respect to our ICT system, correct, we are unfortunately still at the procurement stage. But there's a reason for that, in that we would have had some periods where we were without a board, which would have impacted our ability to move forward. In addition to that, with COVID, most of the due diligence and site visits with our preferred vendor, we would have had to have conducted that virtually. And conducting the site visits on our ICT platform virtually is quite different from actually doing it in person. And that actually also took some time. But I'm pleased, member, to report that the site visits have been completed virtually, the due diligence have been completed, and we do have a recommendation that we are ready to advance to our ICT committee and to the board with respect to the engagement of a vendor, which will really leverage on the technology and be able to, what we would like to say, revolutionize and transform the operations of the NIB from submission of a claim to the actual payment of the funds into your account. So we are at the procurement stage, member, and we did say in our report that we expect to be able to complete that and to actually award the contract on or before June 2022.
So then just allow me, with regard to your records and so on, do you work with paper records, you're saying?
Yes, so as the chair would have said, we are a 49-year-old organization, and we are highly paper-based. So, but our transformation is going to treat with that. So right now we have many digitization exercises ongoing. While we do have a system on internal systems that will allow for the digitization and capture of records as they come in, we have also engaged external providers to support us on that, and that project is ongoing with an end date at the end of February, where we expect to have approximately 13 million plus records will be updated and uploaded to our system, alongside the internal division that continues to update records. And remember, in terms of a context, we have to remember that we serve over 600,000 persons, and unfortunately, data NI-184s and NI-187s, which is the actual forms that come in, they come in paper form at this time. So our transformation move is to actually have a date where we're going to, what we call quality date, where we're going to have employers move towards online submission of records, which will support in terms of the faster turnaround time of claims and the faster turnaround time of actually importing that those records. And our Empower system, well, our ICT system, which is now called Empower, is going to facilitate that. It's going to have online portal, so you can check your contribution statements, online submission of payments, online submission of claims, etc. And with COVID, we have actually been pushed a little bit in that we have made certain of those facilities available already with our existing system. So for example, at this point, we have our payments can be made online, contribution payments can be made online. We have appointment system for claims can be done online. We also have in terms of compliance, our contribution, our employers can also get their compliance certificate online. So we have made some online steps, measures, but our new end-to-end ICT system will give us much more in order to transform the operations of the NIB. We expect to be able to award this contract in 2022, and our implementation phase is just about 24 months for the entire organization and all operations.
Can I ask what's your budget for this exercise? And have you set up the internal structures as well to support this fast-paced transformation that now needs to be done to catch up?
Right. So we have been working with consultants. We have 2 consultants on board right now with the NIB supporting with those operations. And remember, I would like to respond in terms of the budget for this activity. I would like to respond to you in writing on that matter.
Oh, good. That's fine. But the internal structures as well, you've set that up. I mean, you have senior enough people dealing with this digital transformation matter, yes?
Yes, from a human resources point of view too, maybe Brendan can come in. Brendan is also in charge of our HR to support in terms of how we have augmented the human resources internally and our plans to do that to support the operations. Brendan?
Thank you, Executive Director. Members, so as you were saying there, this is a big project, and obviously the organization is going to have to bring on people in terms of temporary people in order to move this forward, so that a lot of our staff will be at the forefront of the exercise, and we'll have to backfill to make sure the operations don't get affected while we implement the new system. So we are working, as Edie would have said, the Executive Director would have said, we are working with the consultants that are on board right now to come up with that plan, to make sure that plan is robust, and to liaise with the provider to make sure that we have all our T's crossed and our I's dotted.
Okay, good. Well, we look forward, the public looks forward to the further and the entire digital transformation of the NIB. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may have a follow-up question, please.
Sure, ma'am. Member Roy.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to NIBTT. The Ministry of Digital Transformation has been guiding ministries, agencies, departments on the digitalization efforts to ensure that in the future we have seamless and integrated system across the board where information could be shared and accessed through different agencies easily. Has NIB sought any guidance from the Ministry of Digital Transformation or even iGov to help them to ensure they build the best possible system to facilitate future integration across other platforms?
Remember, on this particular transformation exercise, no, we would have considered our options in terms of our business requirements and what was required for the unique NIB actual requirements, and we felt it was important to engage the services of a qualified vendor to provide expert guidance in terms of establishing our requirements, our business requirements, our operational requirements. So to answer your question, no, we did not liaise with the iGov on this matter.
Okay, may I suggest, Mr. Chairman, through you, because we now have this Ministry of Digital Transformation, that is the overall body looking at, how things will be implemented, that you engage them in some way to maybe review what is being done and to offer guidance as well.
Chairman, if I may be permitted, Brendan Nelson, if I could support you on this as well, we do continue to align with government policy, and we do have a cloud computing policy that we would have liaised with iGov.TT on in terms of making sure that the policy is more or less in line with what we feel is going to be government policy with regards to this. So we do at some point engage with iGov.TT, but as the ED says specifically with regards to the requirements that NIBTT needs in order to properly affect this change that it wants to affect. I mean, it's going to be specific to NIBTT in terms of what we do. So as we were saying, claims will be processed a particular way. We're going to be able to track how claims are done, how long it stays on somebody's desk, that type of thing. So at this stage, we can have conversations with the Transformation Ministry, but I think it's still going to be very specific to what NIBTT needs to do, to get the robust system that it needs in order to provide the kind of support to the public in terms of how we interact with them. But it doesn't mean that the solution that we get would not be able to interact with an iGov.TT interface or something that allows iGov.TT or people using iGov.TT to come to maybe our website and have information available a particular way. I don't know if that helps.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Following up along the same lines, Madam Executive Director, I'm assuming that, well, you basically just said that this computerization and digitization would be, in fact, in effect within the next 3 years or so. I'm I am one of those persons as a sitting MP, and several of my colleagues here are sitting MPs would have received multiple complaints from members of the public about extensive delays in accessing their applications and having their applications fulfilled to get their applications sorted out for various types of benefits. I note in one of your submissions dated February 15, 2021, you provided an average number of days to determine some of these claims being made by members of the public, which shows very positively, it shows a reducing number of days, which implies that with the existing system, you have been able to reduce days for settlement of claims. I am hoping, given that the procurement stage has now taken 4 years, that 4+ years, that the implementation and rollout would not take a substantial amount of time so that persons would no longer have to complain about the extensive delay in actually accessing resources.
Chairman, that vision is shared by the board and management of the NIB. So we have targets internally for the long-term and short-term determination of claims. And yes, they vary, but it is really dependent on the records coming into the NIB. So once our transformation and our digitization, which is ongoing exercises are completed, we will be better placed to have a faster turnaround time of those claims and to settle in a faster way. But the ICT system, of course, is also going to support that, because we're going to be moving from paper to electronic. So just in terms of moving it from desk to desk, it's just going to actually speed up the process. So Chair, yes, we would be pushing very hard to ensure that the implementation takes no more than 2 years. And we too are waiting to ensure that the public can benefit from this service, because they deserve this transformation of the NIB.
I just have a couple more questions. If none of my other colleagues do, I'll proceed and then with their engagement, if so required. Can the Ministry of Finance advise what is the current status of the high-level working committee report with regards to the employment, the incorporation of self-employed persons in the NIB register? Madam PS.
Thank you, Chairman. Let's give me half a minute, please. Okay. Okay, so the report was received by the Ministry of Finance, and there are certain recommendations that were made, and these recommendations are being analyzed at this point. Now, given that the report was done in 2020, and we now have, COVID has impacted our economy, and there would have been assumptions made to put forward the recommendations. We would now have to look at, we would now have to, but we are looking at all the factors, and they are currently being assessed.
Thank you, Madam PS. Along the same lines, I noted in the reports, the annual reports, that we've had a drop in the number of contributors and contributions from 516,926 contributors in 2015 to below 400 to about 404,197. That's a drop of over 172,000 contributors listed under the NIB. That also has specific impact on the revenue stream of the NIB. So I'm looking at it from the other side, where if we found ways of increasing the number of contributors, hopefully by the government's involvement in employment generation or by the incorporation of the self-employed persons, that we may have an impact in terms of increasing revenue generation directly from existing sources. But the question I want to ask is whether the executive director can give us an opinion as to what she thinks would have resulted in this significant fall of 172,000 contributors over the last 6 years.
Chair, the information that I have before me with respect to contributors, actually says that we have been around 400,000 for the last couple of years. So when you look at 2017, in terms of the contributors, we have been 479,000, 2018, 452,000, 2019, 420,000, and 2020, 404,000. If you can direct me to where you are referring to, but just in that context, Chair, we have had some falling out of the system in terms of insured persons. And that, again, was anticipated as a result of COVID and persons losing their jobs. Our system estimated approximately 50,000 or thereabouts would have an initial fall, and then it would slowly climb back up. Is that the number you're referring to, Chair?
No, I'm actually talking about contributors themselves. It's one of these documents here. Let's move forward, and I can come back to it once I locate it.
All right, and I will just ask Fayad to confirm again, in terms of the insured population, that would have fallen by approximately 40 to 50,000 over the last 2 years. Fayad, as a result of COVID and COVID-related incidents?
So in terms of the last 2 years, we would have seen a decline of 16,000 from 2019 to 2020. Recent data indicates that it's picking up. So it would have dropped as a result of the COVID measures implemented in the financial year 2020. But recent data indicates that this is slowly improving in terms of the numbers of contributors into the system.
Okay, but I'm not speaking just from the last 2 years. I'm speaking because I understand COVID would have had some impact. I'm actually speaking from a period from before. And the figures I had looked at compared 2015 to 2020, which would have included the 16,000 that you referenced before. So based just on what the figures you have, you referenced 2019 and 2020 for the last 2 years, I'm assuming. So can you then go backwards to check for me from 2015 to current, whether my figures are in error? Page 8. So I'm looking for the number of contributors who would have, what was the number of contributors and the difference between 2015 and current?
So, Chair, I have before me the data for 2017 to 2020. I don't actually have the data with respect to 14 and 15. If Fayad has it, he can support on those 2 years. Fayad, do you have that?
No, Edie, it's not available. I have from 2017 as well.
So, Chair, perhaps we can submit that to you in writing. I would detail for you the insured contributors from 2014 to 2020. And we would also submit in writing our thoughts in terms of the fluctuations of that data as to why it would have occurred. Would that be okay?
Yes, it will be. So you'll give it to me by year, right? Disaggregate by year.
Yes, Chair. Yes.
Thank you. One further question. I note that you have, I think this is the River Roads project, where we have a net project shortfall between revenue and expenditure of 104 million. I'm assuming that is to date, that there's a loss in that project of $104 million attributed to the NIB. And there's an intention to sell off the plots based on correspondence that you gave to us for a value of in the region of 13.6 based on market value, etc. My question then is that we have this loss in an investment undertaken by the NIB, which is a substantial loss. And you're now proceeding to sell assets to help in settling that loss. Is it the intention of the NIB to dispose of any other properties or assets that they may have to treat with either individual project loss like this, or the difference between expenditure and revenue in the operating expenses and in terms of the annual operations? So my straight question is whether or not the NIB sees in the near future any, or whether it has been happening now, any sale of assets, including land and other assets, over the short term for the purpose of meeting its current expenditure requirements.
Chairman, for the purpose of meeting our current expenditure, there are no immediate plans to dispose of land to meet those, to meet that. Of course, the investment committee will continue to look in accordance with its investment policy statement. We'll look at opportunities in terms of acquisitions and disposals, but specifically in terms of selling to pay benefits, we have no intention of disposing of our current assets at this time to pay benefits.
Thank you. Other colleagues, any other questions, colleagues, for the members present? If there are no other questions from my colleagues, then it falls to me to sincerely thank the representatives of the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Finance and the National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago for their attendance here today, and for your participation in responding to questions made by the Committee on Provision of Information. And to also thank members of the viewing audience for tuning in and for submitting questions as they have done. Thank you all. Have a safe day. God bless.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman and members.
Thanks all.